You want another example of black fatigue and a retroactive validation for the Klan existence in the late 1800s and huge popularity in the early 1900s? Well, let's take this example. A little over a week ago, you had hundreds of climbers stuck on Mount Everest. And now one would ask yourself, well, how could this be made into a race issue involving so-called black people? Especially from the posts that we saw of some of the hikers while they were stuck, there were mainly white folks stuck up there. And it's about climbing mountains and being stuck because of a blizzard. So how can this turn racial? Well, leave it to insufferable Negroes to make it racial because they decided to take to social media while this was happening. They have since been saved. But while it was happening, you had Negroes take to social media, scores of Negroes mocking, making fun, and celebrating the fact that Whitey was suffering because they got stuck on Mount Everest. Now, you should also be reminded more than likely the overwhelming majority of the about, I think, 880 people that were stuck, the ones that were white, it's safe to say the overwhelming majority of them are woke white libtards, are white liberals who view themselves as allies to Negroes like this, support BLM and all that other sort of racial cuckold nonsense. And this is why I, call white liberals the most pathetic people on the planet. Believe it or not, even more so than Negroes. Because at least with Negroes, they portray this sense of caring about other black people, even though in reality we know that's not the case. But at least they portray it and speak it. Meanwhile, white liberals will will support people that openly despise them and root for their death. And this is why when I was talking about Negroes' reaction to Charlie Kirk, I was saying how that's just a regular habit for Negroes. They just love celebrating other people's suffering, and not just white people, other black people as well. I mean, rap music, the genre is pretty much built around celebrating people's death or beefing and causing death and destruction and bragging and making rap songs about it. But they truly get off when so-called white people are suffering. You even had Negroes make entire live streams celebrating the fact that white folks that don't even know that they exist, done nothing to them, and more than likely are woke white morons that pander to them. None of that mattered. They still celebrated their suffering. And let me just go down the list of some of the comments on one video where somebody posted on YouTube and what these Negroes were saying. So the top comment at the time that I viewed the video was a person that stated, quote, "This is what happens when you have more money than common sense." Well, there you go. You got a Negro assuming because they're white, solely because they're white, and climbing a mountain that they're rich. And this goes to highlight the inherent inferiority complex that is a major part of the hate-love obsession that these pro-black liberal Negroes have with so-called white people. Because there's nothing under the sun that would suggest mountain climbers are just all rich people. But it's because they're white and climbing mountains, this Negro assumes they have more money than common sense. Anyway, the next comment says, "Ask them to go into a black neighborhood though." Nope. Climb a death trap covered in dead bodies and fecal matter. Where do I sign up? Fools causing problems and trauma for rescuers. Well, I agree with the causing issues for rescuers. I mean, I do believe people that do this sort of thing are morons, but to go out of your way to celebrate them being stuck, I mean, that's a different story. But again, funny enough, you have this commenter highlighting that, well, these people would rather climb a dangerous mountain to climb than go into a black neighborhood. And the fact of the matter is, yes, they all are safer climbing that mountain than going into a black neighborhood, especially a black neighborhood filled with the Negroes in this comment section of this video. I mean, again, Negroes don't do extremist stuff like this, extreme sports like this, even though they will still complain about racism because there's not enough black people who aren't interested in this habit involved in this habit. But yeah, Negroes can't even have a cookout without it being as dangerous as climbing Mount Everest. Negroes can't even go to a funeral for certain individuals without worrying about some young Negroes with switches spraying the funeral, which has happened regularly. Anyway, you have another person saying, quote, they heard it was some natives up there with gold that they could steal. So suggesting that all of these white people, solely because they're white, are colonizers looking to steal from minorities, colored people, BIPOCs, as they like to say. And again, this is how these Negroes think about all so-called white people. Doesn't matter how hard you pander, call yourself an ally. Hell, you can even marry a Negro, adopt a Negro that was abandoned by their Negro parent, like a Colin Kaepernick, and yet and still you will be villainized. But, again, that sort of racial cuckolding and obliviously suicidal behavior of liberal whites, that's something that they're going to have to overcome. I don't think any words I say or how many examples I highlight can save pathetic people like that from themselves. But again, you talk about that term black fatigue, this is just one among many examples that represents that reality. And the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, the fatigue hasn't really settled in because there hasn't been an intolerance backlash to this sort of behavior yet. The way it formed back when the Klan formed. Because, shout out to AK Nation News, but because of seeing some news stories from his videos and live streams, and things that I've, digged for myself, I'm starting to realize this old narrative about Negroes being these meek, terrified of white folks back in the early 1900s, 1800s. I'm starting to realize that those stories were all a lie. A lie primarily propagated by, Hollywood, aka Petalwood, and the education system. The fact of the matter is, Negroes weren't afraid of whitey back in the day and committed crimes against whitey. I mean, there's a lot of news stories from those days that you can see for yourself that shows Negroes weren't these scaredy cats. Now, I do still think Negroes today are worse than Negroes back then because I can't imagine if Negroes behave the way they do today back then when white people in general was less cucked. I can't imagine Negroes surviving that time period. And because courtesy of social media, you see that you have now 24/7 access to how intolerable, how callous, how insufferable, how demented Negroes in general can be. And the reaction to this story is just another prime example of it. And I believe that the Klan's creation was a response to whites that didn't want to live in fear of Negroes. I mean, hell, you listen to so-called black people talk about the creation of the Crips and the Bloods, and they say, well, those gangs were invented, in response to people coming after black folks. It was for their own protection. So the same way that if you want to believe that story, that's why the Crips and Bloods were created. Well, you can apply that same logic to the Klan then. Only difference is the Klan narrative is more likely true than the Crip and Blood narrative. Because again, there's just been too much access and tolerance now over the centuries here in this country to believe this narrative of this, demented evil white man seeking to destroy all Negroes. Because if that was the case, it would have been done over 100 years ago. Or Negroes would have been handled the way Arabs handled Negroes, castrating them and still enslaving into the 21st century. And not the exaggerated idea of enslavement, but literal enslavement. But anyway, this story came across my YouTube feed, and I just had to talk about it. Because, again, it's like only Negroes can go out of their way and make a story that has zero to do with them about them. Just like with the Charlie Kirk situation.